Welcome to Product AMA, your daily online Ask Me Anything. We started Product AMA to give those passionate or curious about product management a daily break, something to look forward to. The format is 1 hour in length, weekdays at 3 p.m. Eastern. The first 30 minutes will always be a guest and a featured topic. The last 30 minutes is devoted to you, the audience, to ask your questions.
Our topic for today is bringing product management to business schools, and who can explain this better than a professor who has tried to integrate integral product management concepts in his course. I am pleased to introduce Professor Kelly Parke, who is a course director for the Innovation Through Design and Technology course at the Schulich School of Business. I was one of the fortunate ones to have taken Professor Kelly's course this past term, and I could resonate so much with the course through my prior experience in product management. Welcome, Professor. Please feel free to introduce yourself to our audience and tell us about what you do apart from teaching at Schulich.
Well, that's great. I'm glad that to see you again. I noticed you're sitting in the front row just like you normally did. I really like that because I'm going to ask you a few questions too. I already warned you that this is going to be an interactive type of session. So I'm really glad to be here. Let me just sort of give you a little, I recognize some of the names on the wall today, but I'm going to say, I'll give you a quick little background so you get a perspective of where I'm coming from. My name is Kelly Parke. I've been around York University for over 30 years, but only 10 years at Schulich. And in the last 10 years, it's been a very interesting ride. And I've also spent some time at University of Toronto and more recently at Harvard doing some work there. It's interesting how things have changed. My background, I have a very, I won't say checkered past, but I have a wide variety of things that I've done that actually helps me, sort of formulate some of the things that we're doing. I started out in the television business, and that's where I know some of the people from there in the media production business. Moved from there into York University in engineering and computing, along with groups at Apple and Commodore and lots of other people in the personal computing world. And I went from that technology side into the design world, and that's kind of what we brought to how we built the course for Schulich at the beginning. And I know we're going to get into some of the details about that, but I've gone from, I forgot to mention, I also was in the music industry and working with artists at performers. And I'm really missing them this summer, I have to tell you. Without seeing any live music, for me, I've done it for 30 years, and not to see a live band, I have to be able to figure that out for the summer, but I'm looking forward to that. Anyway, ask away. I want to keep my introduction relatively short so that we can get to some of your questions.
For sure. Thank you so much for being here. I would like to start off with a question that is fairly common when it comes to product management. And, even I have debated with myself on this. The question is, what is the relationship between the role of formal education in product management and the role of work experience as a product manager?
Well, absolutely. But I think it comes down to somewhat of the definition. And that is something that's a sliding scale. I'm going to ask you, what is your basic definition of a product manager? What did you see that as your job when you were in India? Just tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. My role, so basically I was working for a website and a mobile application where we were helping users research about their new cars and bikes. So my job as a product manager was to not only give them the best experience, but actually solve those problems of around buying a car. So people were worried about knowing more about the actual performance of the car, chatting with the dealers, chatting with the existing owners. So how could we streamline that process and shorten their decision making time? So initially when I started there, we did some research as to how long does it take from actually thinking about buying a car and actually going to the dealer and driving it out of that dealership. It was 3 months long, and the major amount of time was taken by users to gather more information from maybe the company as well as the people who already own that car or that particular bike. So my job was to connect these two user groups through user generated content. And to sum it up, it's like, basic problem solving as to how can you, discover those problems that users have in a current journey, and how can you build an experience around that?
Absolutely. See, I think what you've identified there is that the role is a problem solver. Quite often, it's such a wide variety of things you're going to have to know. I think it's something that's developed over the years at Schulich, and I would say for at least my 10 years that I've been there, is that we've really come a long way in the kind of problem solving techniques that we're using and the kind of applications for product management. The role of product manager has gone broader and broader and broader, so that you have to have a wide variety of skills. You have to get back to some of those really basic skills of observation and questioning, like we went through in class, in order to understand some of the problems you're trying to solve, first of all, and then looking at multiple stakeholders at the same time. So the idea of a product manager, where it fits in a business school, it was an expanding role. There was a period of time, I would guess, maybe, like I'm saying, maybe 10, 15 years ago, where you started to see a lot of the shifts in the school happen, where we're bringing on people with expertise in the area of more what I call soft skills, or other traits than the traditional sort of business school, and it was becoming more important. You have Marcus's course, you have Ingo's course, you have Mark Silver's course, for instance, and Chris Carter, for instance. Bringing that group into the school within the last, say, 10, 15 years has really changed the kind of skills required for a product manager. So having a wide variety of experiences, and actually not just having them, but understanding their importance and relevance to how you build products is going to be so much more important. So we have to get back to some of those really basic skills of observation and questioning.
I resonate a lot with that because, a lot of the skills that a product manager possesses are transferable. So be it like critical thinking or working with a lot of data, I think that can be obtained from different roles, but then that's what encompasses a product manager basically.
Yeah, I'm also dabbling a lot in the world of artificial intelligence. One of my current positions at the university is the artificial intelligence architect, and I'm involved with the design and the interfaces and the applications of artificial intelligence within the university. And it's not just a nice to have. I think it's becoming critical to our business model to be able to not just harness the data, but to actually design the material that's going to be most beneficial for human beings. I know that's a soft skills kind of take on it, but I think we have to understand how we're using this technology and design it properly to be more inclusive design for people. So that's one of the other things that's sort of evolving, is the technology side of what's available and what's possible for the product manager is exponentially being ratcheted up by the capabilities of artificial intelligence.
Awesome. I see a lot of people have joined between this and our first question. So I would like to request, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the Zoom chat, and I'll be taking them up in a bit. Moving on, Professor, my next question to you is, so more and more universities are introducing courses around product management. I know Carnegie Mellon has an entire master's degree in product management. So what was your inspiration of introducing something like this into the business education curriculum at Schulich, and how does it fit into the vision for Schulich to shape future business leaders?
Well, what really happened was Peter, Zach, and myself were working through a group at MIT, and we're learning a lot from what they were doing in the world of design and how it meshed. This is when design thinking was still sort of evolving, and we thought, okay, well, that wasn't a real answer. That's kind of the direction that Rotman took and Roger Martin took with design thinking, and really putting a lot of emphasis on that. We thought it was a great element to have, but it wasn't the entire thing that was necessary. So I think for us, what happened to introduce it to the business school, we had to make it into a form that was a little bit broader and more useful than just design thinking. I think that's how Peter and I approached it from the very, very beginning. We had to come up with something that was going to be useful, that you as a product manager or you working in marketing could take some of these basic skills and apply them across the board. So it was really more of a general kind of course to critical thinking and problem solving. And this gets back to what your definition was on problem solving. We found that most MBAs, and actually most students, for instance, didn't have enough skills in the basic critical thinking skills in order to think their way out of problems when they became complex. And actually, it leads to some of the work that I'm doing right now in the world of resilience, or AQ. And I know you know about a little bit about it because I mentioned it in class. But the agility quotient, the ability to change and pivot, has to be a skill that is practiced, especially right now when we're having so many rapid changes thrown at us. That ability to pivot and change over to something, not just change, but making really well calculated change, that has to be practiced and exercised. So your agility quotient, like your IQ or your EQ, has to evolve a little bit further and faster. So what we started with 10 years ago with these soft skills coming into the MBA programs has evolved to more adaptability skills for product managers, because you're dealing with a whole different set of parameters. Like you have your core courses that you must have in order to understand the breadth of the MBA. But these, some of the other courses that, let's say, the people that I already mentioned, myself, are doing, are really good enhancements to help you think about changes within that world.
Talking about, the skill set of a product manager. So if you look at product management, it is a very pragmatic area of work and requires so many different skills. Yeah. What product management concepts have you introduced in your course, and how can product managers get enough exposure and practical experience so that they are learning by actually doing?
Yeah, absolutely. The way I run the particular classes, and actually I have two classes, one is in creativity and one is in innovation through technology and design. They both run on a flipped classroom model. And that means it's basically divided up into three pieces. The three pieces being, there's a knowledge piece at the beginning where you're introduced to some new information or new knowledge. The second third of the class is applying that knowledge in a practical way, and teams have to struggle with that. And then we get to the mastery, where you actually have to teach somebody else and deliver this material back. And that's really foundational for people to learn and remember things. So my approach and why it's a little bit different is because I really do stick to the flip model, where I give you a lot of the content. We go through some of the pieces at the beginning, but a lot of the actual learning takes place from each other. Because I think what happens is that what I try to set up is the conditions for innovation to happen. And I've explained before that what happens in the Italian Renaissance and a few other, the Enlightenment period over history, was the conditions were created for innovation to happen. So what I've done is we got a little microcosm in the classroom of the flipped classroom is creating those conditions for the innovation to happen. So I think as product managers, when you go through your organizations and you're sort of stuck on some parts, I think you need to sort of revive those conditions. Do you have the right conditions for innovation to happen at your company? Are there the right conditions for innovation to happen within the marketplace? You can actually see it. And it's funny, after a while, you're going to get used to recognizing that there's some problems with the conditions and you can make some changes. So I think that's probably one of the sort of best learnings by doing, is to put you in that situation all the time, that you see what the conditions can be. As a matter of fact, when I build teams in the class, they're actually engineered. And what I mean by that is I don't just take what people are good at. I actually take their personalities and mix them and blend them together so there's contrast. And that contrast is creating some of those creative conditions, because you do learn a lot from each other. And that's kind of the core of how the classroom part runs.
Yeah, I absolutely remember how you divided us in teams. Like, I've never seen that throughout my MBA at Schulich. We actually had a quick quiz where we had to choose among different options on the basis of our personality, and that's how we were divided on the basis of the scores that we got on that quiz. So that was really innovative, and I really liked how that brought in balance within the teams that were created. And of course, like, talking about experience, I still remember the activity that we did around going and exploring spaces, like, experiences. So going to different shops and stores where we could actually actually experience what customers are going through and their journey, and bring about what can be improved there. So really like that component within the class.
I was going to mention the other piece that went with that was the hyper observation techniques. So the idea is you're learning this capability to go in and to just take things way past the obvious for a deeper understanding of the problem, right?
Absolutely. Shifting gears a little bit, the next question is, so at a business school, students come from multitude of different backgrounds and experiences and possess a vast array of skills. What key competencies do product managers bring with themselves so that they can engage better with programs and business schools as well as the students in these programs?
Yeah, I think what happens is that I really like when there's a variety of experiences that come into the classroom, because even though you're all very similar, and students, you're very similar in your aspirations and where you're at as far as the levels, your life experiences are so different, and you seem to forget and you leave those behind. You don't bring those into the classroom. And for me, I want the exact opposite. I want you to bring your life experiences, because we actually have 2 reflection papers that you have to do throughout the semester, and the exercise is twofold. It's one for reflecting and applying some of the things from the classroom to your previous life. And actually, I even give the latitude that if you want to talk about current day or even future possibilities, that's possible. Change the space-time continuum there. But the ability for you to go and reflect on the learnings to your life and how their variations in it is magical for me, because it allows me to show you that you've done this all your life. You just haven't had the right lens on. But it also gives me a sense of where you are as a student, because I'm seeing your thought process played out in front of me. And then I could see your mature, not just your maturity level, but how you've absorbed the material, how you personalize it. That analytical step is so important for a higher understanding of the material than just being able to reiterate it back to me. To be able to quote a bunch of figures or be able to, quote some material doesn't really matter to me as much as you're applying it. So that variety of things in your life, that it for me is a richness that I want to capitalize on. And then also I want you to observe how you do that with your own teams. When you take this knowledge and you work on your own teams, and somebody has been a sailor for 10 years and somebody has done this for so many years and somebody grew up in this part of the world, all of those moments are rich, and we're mining them all together to see the meaning. So for me, that is very, very important. The actual variety of things, I'd actually want to bring more of that into the class.
For sure, for sure. I can very well relate to that, as to not only bringing diverse perspectives, but also everyone bringing their own qualities and set of competencies, which were really helpful which are really helpful in a group setting where you're trying to maintain that fine balance, and everyone brings in their own opinions or even like challenges your point of views. So that was really nice to.
Now I'm going to ask you, do you remember the scaffolding process? So the idea was, a lot of people could generate an initial idea, but the people that were in the middle, where they were so valuable on the team, that could scaffold on that idea and build and build and build. So you may start out with something quite simple and fairly innocent as a comment or a situation, and you could ratchet it up to something quite magnificent just by that the different experiences layered on top of each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I do see a couple of questions in the chat for you, Professor. So first one by Lee is, how do you approach the skill of interviewing customers while being open to discovery and new information?
Yeah, so it's funny because I don't want to diss anybody, but I really don't like focus groups or anything like that for me, because it's tainted sort of data right from the get-go. I actually use a lot more observation. I really rather people observe what's going on rather than asking customers questions. It's behavior. It's consumer behavior, right? Watching the customer behavior and what they will do. That's where some of the insights are coming from. It's not so much from what they're saying.
All right. And another one, there are a number of popular frameworks for product management. Do you have one you like, or do you use, or do you introduce another methodology?
The methodology for product management?
Yeah.
I basically, and I credit Clayton Christensen and Hal Gregerson at MIT and Harvard for their work that they've done in associational thinking as a foundation for how we not only develop where we find new products, but develop new products. Their methodology of associative points in the brain is the methodology that we use in our creativity class. And I use a combination of that in my technology class. But it's basically, I would use the Innovators DNA group. I've taken what they've done, their work, and I've built it into practical lessons and application. So they've got some great research, great work done on it. I'm basically scaffolding. I'm scaffolding on their work and give them full credit for it.
All right. Just as a reminder, feel free to ask your questions in the Zoom chat box. I'll be taking them in a bit. And talking about Clay Christensen, I really like his framework around jobs to be done. And for people on the as audience today, I would highly recommend watching that video around that milkshake story and understanding the jobs to be done framework. That's like really insightful, and how you can, learn about his theory about jobs to be done. And yep, rest in peace, Mr. Clayton. He recently passed away earlier this year, and he's a great thought leader in this field.
Just want to mention, forgive me, I just wanted to mention too that the Harvard Business Review launched and gave out a lot of his articles for free when Clayton passed, so that there's many more of his works that are available to download and read.
Yep, for sure. Moving on. So, Professor, if product managers were to consider an MBA, what's your perspective on the other courses that nicely complement what you're doing in product management? And is there anything unique about Schulich's offering compared to what you have seen elsewhere?
That's a great question, right? Because I'd have to, obviously know the full catalog a lot more. But I just know from word of mouth from my students. I know Ingo's 5150 is a terrific course. Helps you in that sense of discovery too. I give it a little bit of different framework. So it's a good complementary course to take before you take, like a 6810 or 6800 MGMT. Marcus's course is a great course. And also there's lots of people in the consumer behavior side. Also, some of the work that Chris Carter's doing, like I mentioned, with entrepreneurs, that's only recent. You got to remember, that's only in the last, I forget how many years now, but embracing Chris's work and what he's doing is a terrific idea as well, because we actually play well together, because I'm sort of at the front end of the critical thought process in order to sort of see some of these things and opportunities. And Chris, sort of what he's doing with entrepreneurs is sort of actualizing and taking them to the next step. So it's kind of like I would take 5150 to start and take, some work with me, and then do an entrepreneurial piece with Chris. That would be sort of my big three at the moment. And let me just mention, and as far as compared to other places, I think we've got quite a variety at Schulich. Some fabulous faculty, and I'm going to say me excluded. We have some fabulous faculty that are brilliant at what they do in different areas, and work outside the school too. They're doing some terrific work and research in different areas. I'm forgetting lots of people, so forgive me. I don't know the catalog exactly fully, but I think we're in a bit of a growth period. I think I think Schulich's getting quite strong right now. I think we haven't peaked yet. I think we've got a couple more courses to add that would bring it, but I think we're going to have a top-notch offering. We do have a good offering right now, but I think it's even going to be better in the next 2 years.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
After you graduated, right? So you're going to have to come back as an alumni to take advantage of some of the programs.
Yeah, for sure. Looking forward to that. And to those of you who are not from Schulich and are on the AMA with us, there are a lot of courses around entrepreneurship and leadership that you can take when you are trying to get that knowledge about and education about product management. So a lot of courses have a practical aspect to it. So for example, entrepreneurship, we've had courses around you can actually go and work for the company and help them in strategy or product management. So that's a great experience. That's a great hands-on experience, I would say, for students to learn more about what they want to do in product management. Moving on, the last question before I pick up audience questions, Professor. For people who do not want to go through an entire degree to learn more about product management, what do you think is a good starting point to acquire those skills and concepts essential for being a product manager?
Wow, that's a really good question because I think what the MBA does for you, getting your MBA, is shortcut the process. It makes it way more intense, focused period of time. You could gather all of these skills if you want it and not go to business school at all. It would take you 12, 14 years of experience. What the MBA does is it puts a magnifying glass on these things and gets you through it as quickly as possible. Also, it does give you the core education that you're going to need. So I think you could do it. I think the best thing is if I would take a few entrepreneurial risks, and you will learn very, very quickly that way. And that's, trial by fire that way, a little bit risky. And I've had some students that wanted to start their own business and have gone out. As a matter of fact, there was one student who you took a class with this fall who was an entrepreneur in the medical field. And for the coronavirus sort of took hold, he was well aware, probably 3 weeks before everybody else, of what was going to happen. And so it was interesting. He was doing trial by fire as an entrepreneur, just jumping in. He, was coming back to finish off his MBA, but he had so much knowledge already. This was just like the icing on the cake for him. I think by going in and being an entrepreneur for the last 4 years, 5 years, that is probably the best trial by fire, because you're doing everything. And that's one great thing about being a product manager. You are basically the coach of the team. You are, hiring and firing and changing players and doing so much. It's a very difficult, but I have to ask you, Rhythm, is it a rewarding career being a product manager? There's highs, absolute highs, and I'm sure there's absolute lows being responsible for everything.
I would say it's a crazy job, but I love product management because of two primary reasons. One, it's about learning every day. So you're learning about your team, your product, your customers, your process, your company, and yourself. So it's such a rewarding experience, I would say, because you're growing every day, you're learning new things, and then you actually get to apply those learnings. So that's such a great position to be in for me. I really like that. And second is about collaborating and innovating in a team environment. Every person has a different perspective. A designer would bring in some elements into the user experience, and then an engineer will criticize it or support it, and then you have to persuade both of them that this is what we should be doing, other than what you have mentioned. So it's it's a really good experience about collaboration and working in a team. And then Lee mentioned another point, that product management is a great profession for people who are curious. Absolutely. You're continuously asking questions
Lee,
to yourself.
forgive me, Lee. I'm going to interrupt. Lee, you stole my thunder. I was going to give and you forgot to. I don't know if you were there at my first lecture, but I put up a logo of Curious George. Now, if Lee would remember, who Curious George is. I'm not sure you would, but Curious George is this little monkey who is ultimately curious, and that's basically the persona of a product manager.
Yes, absolutely. So I do have a couple of questions, and I would request our audience, if you have any questions, please fire away, and I'll be picking them up right now. So another question is around, do you have any approaches to prioritizing opportunities through the discovery of the innovation process?
Oh, absolutely. So the very first thing that I establish, and I work on the actual defined problem, because quite often that weeds out so many things at the very beginning. I know sounds so counterintuitive to spend so much time on problem definition. That's the process. I mean, as far as trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist, that happens so much in business. We really need to focus in on what the exact problem is, and it's from a multi-stakeholder point of view. It's not sort of a single definition of the problem. Quite often, if I find out, say, there's 5 or 6 major stakeholders in a problem, I will look at it from their point of view and understand how is it a problem to them. So it's the process I use is I spend a lot of time in the problem definition, probably more than most people would. Because it gives me a really good grounding and understanding when we get further and deeper into the product itself. I've already sort of thought about a lot of the other issues that sort of tag along afterwards.
Could you speak more about moving from problem identification, then actually innovating, and then to product market fit?
Wow, that's a long process sometimes. As a matter of fact, I'm in the middle of that right now with the artificial intelligence design at York. Um, it took us 6 months on the problem definition, to believe it or not, to try to sort of figure out how we were going to transform higher education. Um, it then led to lots and lots and lots of questioning to really we had assumptions at the beginning of when we had the problem definition. We had a little bit of the assumption side. We had to then do the questioning, and then there was a lot of observation pieces that happened too, because what people were saying and what was actually happening, you had to interpret it a little for yourself. So we had to engage the questioning and the observation pieces before we started to build prototypes. Absolute big fan of prototypes in product. I'm sure you're very familiar with that. That fail fast, fail often monikers used so much. I want to modify it a little bit though. I don't want it to be fail fast, fail often. I'll launch something sometimes on a pilot form just for information's sake, just to try to figure out what some of the better questions to ask are. So it won't be, intended as something that's launching for a real sort of product. I will get that pilot out there really, really quickly just to understand the issues better, because I don't have enough data. It's funny, it's one of the things that in the world of AI that we're so struggling with at the moment is not just lack of data, lack of good data, is the lack of the right kind of data. So, and with my pilots right now that we're sending out, that's one of the biggest learnings that we've had before we get further on, is we need to have better structures for data, and the kinds of questions that were asked to get the data have to be richer and more revealing. So that process is exactly the same. It's define the problem, question and observe, prototype sort of network together of things as solutions, and then experimentation has to be part of the cycle again. So for me, a product, believe it or not, is never done. It's just in a continual cycle of revision and observation. So once you finish one phase, it's kind of like you're back again to the observation again. So do you ever feel that way, that sometimes, Rhythm, that the product is never perfect?
Yep, absolutely. Like it's all about continuously improving, because when you build something, new opportunities emerge out of that one thing that you build. So it's always about like continuously iterating and continuously about thinking about how can we deliver more value to our end customers and and users. So
It's an
that's
interesting thing I was going to mention too, that quite often what happens is I'll be, say, working on artificial intelligence project, and we're going along, and I'll gather a bunch of knowledge on the area, and then another project will come in, and I will say, well, it kind of reminds me of something we were doing in this other project, and I'll pull this research and data from this other project, and it will associate back over to something else. So it's kind of like you keep gathering more and more and more and more knowledge about these certain areas, and you might find them applicable across different product lines.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. And Lee brings in a very interesting point, that it happens like you stop thinking about building new things or improving a product when it's time for dissolving the product and its end of life in the product life cycle. And that's something very difficult for product managers, but it's a truth.
Yeah, do you know when to give up your baby, right? Do you know when
Yeah.
to say, oh, okay, it's gone as far as we can go, we've got the information, but we may want to boil it into something else? Yeah, that's difficult. It's difficult to give up. It's funny, one of the things I'm sure a lot of you in the MBA have gone through 601, and one of the 601 problems that I've always seen is that no team ever wants to give up on the company. They always want to save it. They always want to do something with it. And you always have to have that ability to say, okay, well, it makes more sense to shut it down, or it makes so that's the difficult part, is understanding and realizing that.
Hmm. Well, we have a question from Ankit here, and he said, he asks that you had spoken about the agility quotient and fast adaptability in the planning phase of product management. What aspects or characteristic traits should we try to incorporate so that we can always be ready for any quick change we might be required to make?
Yeah. So part of the main thing that has to happen to raise your by the way, the agility quotient is something that's done in nature and has been done, happening for millions of years. And it's what I would suggest, some of the skill set that you have has to be looking for changes and opportunities that are happening or evolving at the same time. So when you get some new data or some new information or some new analysis, you have to sort of say, okay, where does it fit? But also, what does it mean to me? So I think you constantly are in this analysis and observation mode, taking every bit of information in. So it's not like you can just sort of rest and let somebody take lead on this information. You have to be able to say, okay, well, I'm going to park that over here for a second, and I'm going to suspend this idea. So just to quote Roger Martin here for a second, and one of the things he talks about is the opposable mind. And the opposable mind is having, here's one answer to a solution, here's another answer to a solution. You suspend both of them together, and you come up with something else altogether. So one of the main adaptability skills is the ability to not just settle for the right answer all the time. Hold that in perspective, listen to other people, scaffold on ideas, right? And then make the judgments at the time, but don't be afraid to pivot, because sometimes you have to have that courage in order to do that. So the adaptability means sometimes you have to, shift gears, right? And that only comes through observation and questioning, right? And networking and experimentation.
Yeah. An interesting question comes up to my mind. So what is for people, who don't have any experience in product management, what are the best ways to get early experience, and how should they be approaching it?
Best ways of approaching product management. Actually, it's always good to work with somebody that somebody else as a mentor. If you have that opportunity, like, get yourself into a position where you can learn from somebody but not be directly responsible. So that, for me, mentorship is a key to learning great product management. I mean, I would give up money to be able to work with somebody that was well respected and gave me the opportunity to learn from them. I think at the beginning of your career, that's kind of what you have to do. It's like playing tennis. And when you're playing tennis, you have to you get better if you play with somebody that's much better than you are at the beginning, right? So looking for opportunities to learn or experience things rather than being responsible for everything right from the get-go and having a terrible experience, I would suggest having a mentor and seeking those mentors out to be one of the key factors here.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I think there are so many people who are participating as working groups and building products for the social good. Participating in such working groups, I was a part of one of these groups in Toronto, and you can definitely reach out to people and ask them if they are doing projects and work with them. And looking at neighboring roles and neighboring roles to product management, so like business development, customer success, where you're directly interacting with the end customers, and you have a good hang of what their needs are and what their pains are, then you can slowly and steadily pivot into product management if you don't have any experience in this field prior to like moving into this field. Another question, I think we're nearly approaching the end of this session, and this question is regarding data. And Shiveen asks about which drives more product decisions, qualitative or quantitative data?
I would suggest qualitative data. This is one of the complaints I was having about AI, is that we can have tons and tons of data, but the actual material, things we're trying to investigate, it's not relative enough or it's not rich enough. And I think I would offer less data but better quality, so qualitative for sure.
And I think we have one more question before we wrap up. So how do you teach your students to uncover their assumptions?
Wow. Okay. How do I break them of bad habits? Yeah, absolutely. So we have, in order to move forward, and when we're in first class, second class, I have to allow the assumptions to sort of happen. Bad habits, let them get used to that. And then what happens, we get to, say week number 3 and 4, we start to get rid of those assumptions and we open our mind to different possibilities. It's interesting because everybody wants to have a solution so early, they jump in. So what I do is I say, I will go through and I will run some exercises to open up possibilities for them, like question storming. It's a form of brainstorming, right? That allows them to look at it from multiple perspectives and sort of open and broaden their scope. Because quite often I'm finding everybody's too narrow at the beginning. So what we start off with is what I like to do in the class is start off with a diverse approach. Everything's valid and on the table. And then as we get to a certain point based on the time, like as far as time in the semester, we have to start to constrict or narrow the focus down. And so all of that beginning diverse approach basically is just a sort of a feeder so that if we need to reach back for more information, we can do it. But I allow the beginning to be very diverse. So that's how I do it. We run some exercises to do the sharpening and the focusing about, say, week number 5 to week number 6.
Well, thank you so much, Professor, for all these insights and answering all our questions that we had. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And it's been a pleasure to chat with Professor Kelly here and learn more about education in product management. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe and healthy, and take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Follow Product AMA on Twitter and send us your topic suggestions. We look forward to seeing you soon.